This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 213. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberley Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Welcome back, everybody. Oh, so happy to be here. How are you? How are you doing? I've been thinking about you all so much lately. Reflecting a lot after Thanksgiving, being so grateful for you and this community and for your support. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I am super thrilled to have the amazing Natasha Daniels on. Natasha is an OCD specialist. She is an amazing therapist who helps families, particularly parents, of kids with anxiety and OCD. She does an incredible job. So please do check the show notes to learn more about Natasha. But today she came on to talk about managing anxiety in the kiddos. We don't talk enough about managing anxiety with the kiddos. And the cool thing for me was it was so synchronistic because the day that she recorded and came on, we were prepping in my family for my daughter to do a really hard thing. So I needed to hear what she had to say, even though I knew a lot and I'd been trained a lot on it. I just needed to hear it as a parent. And if you are a parent of someone who has anxiety, you will just love this episode. So many amazing tips and tools and skills and concepts. And I just cannot tell you how grateful I am to have Natasha come on and talk about these things with us today. So before we go over to that episode, I first want to do the I Did a Hard Thing segment. The first one is from Bex. And Bex is saying, I have been so anxious that I've been carrying COVID without knowing who I'm infecting. Now, I think this is true for a lot of us, myself included. So I think we can all resonate with this story. Bex went on to say, recently I have been doing 5 to 10 lateral flow COVID tests every day to check before leaving the house. I had run out of tests and had planned to meet a friend with her 3-month-old baby. I was so anxious before leaving the house and considered canceling to avoid the doubt of passing COVID unknowingly. But I gave my fear a talking to. I just love that you did that. I didn't want fear to win this time. I wanted to see my friend and her beautiful new baby. I shared my fear with my friend, and without asking for reassurance, I spent the loveliest day with them. I have been ruminating a little since, but I keep reminding myself to return to my values and not let fear win. Bex, amazing work. It sounds like you're wading through some difficult fear and you totally let values win. So that makes me so happy. Great job. I'm so in love with you guys when you share your hard thing with us. Okay, let's go over to the episode. Well, I am so excited to share the amazing Natasha Daniels. Natasha, I can't wait for you to tell us about you. I'm going to let you sort of explain about your work. You're doing such amazing work. I'm actually so excited for this episode because we're talking about managing OCD and phobias in children. We talk a lot about this stuff, but not specifically around children. So I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. It's always nice to talk to you.
Yeah. First, tell us about you and the work you're doing.
Well, I am a child and anxiety child therapist, and I have 3 kids with anxiety and OCD, so I kind of get it on both hats. And I provide online resources for parents who are raising kids with anxiety and OCD because we need a lot of support.
Right. Your platform is so great. In fact, I've taken one of your trainings, the space training, and it's so wonderful. So I can't wait at the end for you to share about that for people and parents who are struggling, but also for clinicians. Really, really helpful.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So I want to talk with you about ERP, but also just anxiety management for the kids who are struggling with OCD and phobias. In your experience, is there a difference between how treatment looks for folks who are adults and the children we have with OCD and phobias?
I think on a fundamental level, it's very similar. The whole structure is identical, but then we have to take into consideration a couple of different things. One, I think you have to work on the motivation and incentivizing more than you do with someone who's coming, willingly. So a lot of times we might notice an issue going on with our child, but they're another person. And so that approach will look different. And also developmentally, how they can understand ERP. So how you explain it, how you gamify it, that looks different, I think, as well. We want to engage them. If you don't have an engaged child, you don't have ERP. So that's another aspect. And then I'd say the third one, the last one, is developmental aspects of it. So we're very careful with ERP to not do a lot of education because we worry maybe if I'm educating them, I'm actually reassuring them. But with kids, I find, at least with myself in my practice and with my own kids, I have to do a little bit of psychoeducation because they may not even know what's normal versus what's not normal. And so I think that piece might be a little bit different than when you're working with adults.
Right. Yeah, I think that's so true. Particularly, even I remember when my son was really young and really severe dog phobia is he wasn't around a lot of dogs. And when a dog ran at him, he actually thought they were like going to kill him, right? Because they're the same size. So it was really important that we educated him on this is a dog, but it's not a lion kind of thing. So it was really important for him.
Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned gamifying, and I wanted to can you explain what that means?
Well, I think when we want to offer incentives. And so because most kids don't have that intrinsic motivation to realize the bigger picture of I don't want OCD. This is going to have huge ramifications in my life. They just see now. And so asking them to go metaphorically swim with a bunch of sharks, it's just not going to happen. But if we can gamify it and make it fun, and I use, bravery points or the earning stuff, and they can buy things at my bravery store. I use apps. I actually like the Privilege app. They should pay me because I promote them so much. Because it's a chore app, but it's just really easy for kids to convert it. And then they can have it on their iPad. So I'm giving my kids points and they can hear the little change going on their iPad, like they just got something. That aspect of it really helps motivate kids to work on and do hard things because they may not philosophically get the benefits. They will long term and even short term. Once they start doing ERP, they say, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. But that's not enough. And so gamifying it actually makes a lot of kids come and ask me, can I do another exposure? My kids always ask, can I do another exposure? If they want something, what exposures can I do for this? And that creates a household where we're doing ERP for fun.
Mm. I love that you talk about that. I mean, we do live in such an electronic world, and it is an incentive. Like, I know for me, my kids will do anything if there is some kind of electronic reward at the end there. And it's a huge piece, and I have a daughter, I mentioned to you before the recording, who is doing her own set of exposures right now, and she doesn't want to do them. Why would she?
Right.
So it's really helpful to gamify it as much as you can. I love that you mentioned that.
Yeah, it definitely helps. And I think even people who are Ross Green fans, and they follow the CPS model. I hear that a lot in the parenting world. He's not pro incentive. And I interviewed him and even he was like, for anxiety and OCD, it can be a very important component as long as you're constantly, I think, upping the game, so you're doing an exposure that's harder and harder. So they're not just getting, A plus B equals C all the time. And then you're pulling back those incentives over time, spreading them out, using intermittently. So there are ways to pull it back.
So good. So good. So let's say a child at different ages, it could be, you may even want to distinguish different age groups if that's appropriate. But let's say they have a fear, a phobia, or an obsession about something. Can you share what it would look like to do ERP with a child?
I think the first part is really getting them to understand what it is. Because I think sometimes I have parents that are like, they are ready to go and they forget they have to really educate the child and get the child to meet them where they're at. So understanding how OCD works, that the more you avoid, the bigger it grows. And then partnering with them ideally if your child is in that space. So sometimes we have to actually work on communication and trust for a long period of time. And that might be your only step for a long time. And parents kind of miss that. They think if my child's not willing to do ERP, then all bets are off. And I say, no, you're at the beginning of the journey. So, you have to educate them and motivate them, work on communication. But then as we progress, I'll just use my kids as an example because it's easy. If they have a phobia or if they have an intrusive thought, we'll say, okay, what are some things, they get the concept of I have to walk towards my fear or towards my discomfort. So we want to partner with our kids and say, what things can we do to upset your OCD, to sit in discomfort? And so we might just make a list, might brainstorm. My daughter had like a 2-day period where she like had this extreme intrusive thought about blood. And it wasn't one of her themes, but it was just, I'm going to use this as an example. And so it just went from 0 to 60. She had like one science experiment. They were like online. They had to look at it like a body with like the pathways of the veins and the arteries or whatever. And she couldn't touch anyone because like she didn't want to like stop their blood. And so just whatever that is for your child, just sitting with them and saying, what are some things that we can do? And she was very resistant. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to. And so I was like, could you look at an emoji of like a little thing of blood? So we started off making a list, and I would say, you don't have to do all this, but let's just brainstorm some of the things that would upset your OCD right now. And then some people pick a menu, like just pick one today and let's just start with that. And that's how you begin. It's just baby steps towards learning how to sit in the discomfort.
I love that. Now, during the exposure, what does that look like for a child? I'll give you a personal example. We were doing a video exposure with my daughter yesterday, and she was all tensed up, leaning back, head in the pillow, right? Like grasping, gripping, resisting, all the things. And I educated her. So what would it look like for a parent? How would they maybe, or in a clinician, how would they coach them through the actual exposure?
In a perfect world, we want them to kind of take the lead. And it's so hard when they have that response. And I had done needle exposures too with my kids. And so sometimes when I see that reaction, I'll stop and I'll just say, well, actually, my son had to take a COVID test. This is another example. And he wouldn't stick it up his nose. And so then, of course, I got frustrated. So I was like chasing him with a stick. I was like, give me your nose. It was not a fine mom moment. And then finally I stopped and I was like, how do you want to handle this? What do you want to do? We cannot do it, and then he's like, I'll do it. And so I just had to walk away. But I think sometimes with exposures, it's just taking that pause and saying, where do you want me to poke you? If we're talking about like a poking exposure, or where's your level of comfort? Ideally, over time, we want them to start doing these things for themselves. And so we want them to be on automatic pilot, that they're doing an exposure and we're kind of sitting back. So all we're doing at some point is saying, this is less for a phobia that's situational and obviously more for like an ongoing thing. But with my daughter with the metaphobia, the fear of throwing up, I might say, what exposure do you want to do? And then let me know when you do it. And then I'll give you a brave point. And then I might hover in the kitchen and just watch her do it, but try to be less involved.
Right. I love that. On our end, I had to keep explaining to her that the more you tense and the more you cringe, the more you're kind of like reinforcing the fear, and to try and sit still. She's trying to practice. Again, she doesn't have to act perfect. I always say, you don't have to take the fear away, but you can't be cringing and hiding behind the pillows and so forth. It's, that's a big piece of the work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's such an important piece that I think a lot of parents miss is not surviving the exposure. Like for my son with his anxiety, I'd be like, go upstairs to do an exposure, go get your shoes or whatever. And this was more anxiety based, not OCD. And he'd like run upstairs like he's like avoiding a killer, and then he'd run back downstairs. And I'm like, all you did was teach your brain that you survived.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you got to walk.
Right.
So yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good point.
I love that. Okay. So I love that you've already shared, like, you didn't have a perfect parent moment, right? Because I think parents is already, it's hard to be a parent. It's hard to, we have so many expectations on ourselves. Can you give us some ideas of what to say and what not to say, or how parents may support their child better in these examples?
It is really tricky. And I think and you're so good at this, like the self-compassion piece. And I think parentally we have to start with self-compassion and say, you're not gonna knock it out of the park all the time. You're gonna say things that you're like, oh my gosh, that was like the worst thing to say ever. You might trigger your child inadvertently. So I think having that compassion first isn't really important. And that's why I always often share my mistakes, because I'm human, we're all human. But I think in a perfect world, the ultimate goal is we're just trying to get our child to be able to sit in discomfort. So we're not discounting their fears. And I think sometimes parents hear, I'm not supposed to accommodate, which they in turn view as, I'm not supposed to support them.
Mm,
And that concerns me, because I think a little bit of information can be harmful.
mm,
So it's not that you can't support them, but you just want to sit and validate. I know this is hard for you. And I'll take an example, just so I'm all concrete. Let's go back to emetophobia, the fear of throw up. Sometimes parents will say, when I say you can't say, or I don't normally talk like that, like you can't say, but it's not helpful to say you're not going to throw up, because
yeah.
we really want them to accept that they may or may not, they may or may not throw up, and that they're going to be okay either way, right? That I'm sure they can handle the discomfort. And so sometimes that confuses parents, because then the child's stomach is hurting and they're saying, I'm worried I'm going to throw up, and then they can't say anything. So they're like, got to go to school, get your shoes on. It's like we're turning into robots. But it's just validating the feelings. I know this is hard for you. I know that this is really rough, and I'm so sorry. This is how I talk to my kids. I'm
Mm,
so sorry that OCD is really bothering you right now, and I know that you can handle it no matter what happens. And so giving them that support and validation without the accommodation of nothing bad's going to happen to you.
mm. Yeah. It's hard. I mean, it's funny because it's hard to see your child in pain, right? It's hard to watch them struggle. You want to take their pain away. You want to come in and in some cases I will even disclose, like, there's times where maybe I'm not feeling like I'm being a good parent in general, and I kind of want to rescue them so my kid likes me again. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
there's so many components that can suck us into, let me just rescue this one time, right?
Yeah.
And where I really am curious to hear what I really have struggled with my patients, right? The thing that they're working through is when a compulsion or avoidance is done because they want their kid to go to school. Like, well, if I don't do this compulsion for them, they won't go to school. And I need them to go to school, or I need them to get their homework done. So I'm actually going to do this compulsion for them and accommodate them because school is the most important thing at that point. So what is your advice to parents who get stuck in that accommodation cycle because they're trying to keep the kid functioning in other areas?
Yeah. And it's definitely a balancing act, because we can't not accommodate everything at once. And so if the ultimate goal is get them to school, then there might be some things that we have to do to get them to school, but then we have to pull back. And it can snowball, and snowballed with me. I'll just like throw myself under the bus the entire interview. Why not? Make Natasha look really good. But when my daughter was, I think, first grade, she had emetophobia, the fear of throw up, and sensory motor OCD, where she thought she was going to pee all the time. So both of those together were a nightmare. And we just needed to get her to school. She didn't want to go to school. And so initially it was just, I can't go into the cafeteria. And so there were accommodations made. Oh, if it's just lunch, then we'll have you go eat in another classroom. But OCD is never satisfied. And so you have to have that awareness. And that was me as a parent. Intellectually, I knew, okay, you have to be careful with this because we're accommodating it. But then it was recess, then it was PE. And then she was spending half the day in the nurse because we were over accommodating. And then we had to start to scale back and then get her back into the cafeteria. So I think you just have to be aware that it is a balancing act, that yes, there are some things that you might have to accommodate, but then it's not a permanent thing. You have to constantly reassess and pull back those accommodations.
And I love that you share it. It's funny because Sometimes I shock myself as a clinician. I know exactly what to do, and I completely forget to do it with my kids.
It's so hard.
And I say I completely forget. I'm not like in denial. I actually forget of like, no, she's my child. It's my job. I have to like protect her or protect him. So I think it's important that we talk about that, because parents can be really, really hard on themselves and beat themselves up. I know we've talked about that in the past. So thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so what about in the school setting? How do you encourage parents to communicate this with teachers, personnel, or principals, and so forth? How much do you encourage people to disclose?
I think it's really important to help the school understand your child. And I know that a lot of times parents are worried about stigma or their permanent record, and so they avoid that. But really, we're setting our kids up for failure, and we're setting the teacher up for failure. So if they're young, especially when they're young, I think it is good to write like a little summary of like, these are their issues, but be specific. These are the ways that it will show up in school, and these are the ways that you can help. And, giving that to the teacher, I always gave that to the teacher, whenever you'd get that thing in the mail that said, or like in their backpack that's, let me get to know your child. I would like staple like this whole like clinical summary in the back, or I'd email them, or I would ask them, can I like meet with you alone after the parent teacher conference? But I wanted them to, so sometimes parents will say, well, I want them to get to know my child first before they see them as having a disorder. And I have found over and over again that it only benefited my child when they knew they had anxiety and OCD, that they weren't being a problem child. They weren't trying to go to the bathroom to avoid. They had certain issues that were going to show up. So I do think it's important. Now, my son and my daughter, my older daughter, both also have anxiety, OCD issues. My daughter's 18. Once she hit an age, I'd ask her, do you want me to notify your teachers? She hit a bump in high school, and I offered I could go in and talk to the counselor. And I actually did this past year because we had another issue going on. But there was a respect issue. It was at that point, that was her life. And my son, who's 12, now I also ask, but when it became an issue, I said, I need to tell your teachers. Yeah. And so it's, you have to kind of decide.
And there's no rule, right? And every kid is probably different too, right? I know for my kids, they're such different little human beings. So my approach is way different with them. Absolutely. So, okay, a couple of questions I know I'm just coming up because I wanted to ask. So as a parent, managing, it's hard to see your kids suffer, and it's also hard to see them avoid. I know it's interesting. My first reaction, surprisingly, was anger, right? Like it made me angry that this was happening. What might parents do for themselves to manage their own emotional experience when they watch their child suffering?
It can be very triggering, and it could impact your relationship with your partner because you're approaching it differently. It can tap you out because you're spending so much time helping your kids that you are forgetting to focus on yourself. And so, that cliched statement of putting the oxygen mask on yourself first actually has a lot of validity, because how you view your child, how you take care of yourself, your health, your emotional and physical health, and also how you catastrophize your child's issues will impact your child's ability to have long-term success. And so sometimes I try to get parents to connect their child's success with their own issues, because that's the only thing that'll motivate them to focus inward, because they're selfless and they want to focus on their child. Don't worry about me. That's not a front burner issue. Let me focus on my child. And I try to get parents to see you're a pivotal point. Yeah. Because when you're catastrophizing and you're seeing a college student in front of you not functioning and they're in kindergarten, that's doing something to how you approach that child. That's creating a lot of anxiety with that. So self-work is really important.
Yeah, it's so important. It is so important. I did some reflecting this week in terms of, we have a dentist appointment that is going to be hard. It's funny we're talking this week, because this is the week that we have a huge procedure happening. And I'm doing my own work and sitting in like, it is what it is. I can support, I can encourage, I can do the exposures. But when I start getting grasping, I'm like, no, it has to happen. She has to get it, and it has to be done, and it has to be done that day. And that's when I don't show up as the parent I want to be. And shows up in many areas. It's not just when I'm with them. It's like I'm angry when I'm typing and I'm frustrated when I'm taking a walk. It shows up in so
Yeah.
many areas. So I feel such deep compassion for the parent who is anticipating these upcoming events like vaccinations and, Halloween being a big one for some kids. Some parents are dreading these events.
Yeah. And knowing what your own triggers are. I know what my triggers are. I know I can't handle choking. I know I can't handle, my husband used to take my kids to get blood work because I have a thing with shots and blood work. And so if you can tap out and have someone else do it, if it's a trigger for you, that could be helpful. Or knowing how to kind of center yourself. I had to really fake it this past year because there was no help, and they were just sitting on my lap and they can feel my energy. They can, so I had to authentically do my own work, not fake it, because they can feel it. They can feel it in your body, and just say, if they don't get it done, like you said, if they don't get it done, they don't get it done. If they pass out or throw up, because I think that's my phobia. It's like, I don't want them to pass out in front of me because they always do, then it's going to be okay no matter what. So, yeah.
Yeah. Did you, as a parent, if you don't mind me asking, have to do your own exposures to their exposures?
Taking them has been an exposure. It's actually not an exposure because it's just happening to me. But I actually didn't. I just do my own internal work. I find just telling myself that it doesn't matter if they pass out, and they do, and they still do. And it's all still okay.
Yeah, you're amazing. It's really inspiring, actually, to know you're walking the walk, not just talking the talk. It's really quite impressive.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So what do you do if your child adamantly does not want to engage in treatment?
It's really important that we get them to enter treatment approaches on their own, because I really feel like we can break their ability to embrace approaches like lifelong if we strong arm them, and we force them and we do things. I've had parents say, like, I just take their hand and I make them touch stuff. And I think that child's never going to do that on their own then, because it's, we're always going to dig our heels back. So I think it's meeting your child where your child is at. And there's always an entry point. It may not be the entry point you want. And I totally get that, because, my son, he did not want to do anything initially. And that's frustrating when your child's starving to death, but you can't force it. You can't grab the steering wheel and drive for them. And so it's, what do they need for me to get them to that point? Do I just have to work on communication with them? Do I just have to work on them trusting? They like say something and I just listen. Can I just get them to watch a bunch of YouTube videos or read a couple of books and give them bravery points for doing that? That's treatment, that's education. So I think it's just finding out, where does your child want to start?
Right. I know I took one of your courses, the space training, which was amazing. And I found that really helpful too, is to just catch, if they don't want to do treatment, to catch where the accommodation is happening on the parents' end. Did you want to share a little about that?
Yeah, I think that the space program, Ellie Leibowitz's space program, is huge because it finally empowers parents to do something, even if their children don't want anything to do with it. So you can work on your trust and communication, but then there are so much. OCD is a family affair, like we often say, and there's a lot that we can do that OCD wants us to do. And so working on how we approach it, what kind of family environment do we create in our home? What things do we pull back our accommodation? There's a lot of work that a parent can do on their own. And that's what the space program does. And I have a study guide because I think some people just want a video of like, just break it down for me, Natasha.
Yeah, that was me. I'm like, I want the bullet point version.
Yeah, that's what that does.
That was amazing. Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much. This has been so incredibly helpful. I'm wondering if you could give us some major points, things that you really feel that we need to know, either as clinicians or parents or loved ones of a child who's struggling with OCD and anxiety. What are some main points or things that you want us to know before we sign off for the day?
Well, I think you cover a lot in your podcast with such good information. So I would just add to that and say, don't forget to make it fun, right? I mean, all this doom and gloom is the kids can feel that, and we can make OCD fun, and we can gamify it. So that's really important. And I think the other part is not forgetting to highlight the superpowers that kids with anxiety and OCD have, letting them know that there are amazing qualities that come with a person who has anxiety or OCD. And my kids kind of get proud of that. They start to feel like, I'm intuitive, or I'm kind-hearted, or my superpower. They'll even actually say, my superpower is. And so don't forget that part. That piece is important.
So important, particularly because with OCD and anxiety comes so many qualities, right? They can have qualities that they're so brave, they're so courageous, they're so resilient. These are things that will serve them for life.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much. Number one, as a human being, thank you, because I needed this week without even realizing it.
I'm glad it was good timing.
It was such great timing. But also thank you for all the amazing work that you do. I think this is an incredible resource. So can you tell us where people can go to hear more about you?
Yeah, and thank you for your work. I think that you're just putting such good stuff out there. People can find, if they want to look at my online courses, they can go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com. And I provide online resources for parents and courses to teach you how to help your kids crush anxiety and OCD. And they can also listen to my podcast, and AT Parenting Survival podcast.
Great. And the podcast. And I'll have links in the show notes for anyone who wants to access that. I am so grateful for you. Thank you so much for doing such a great work.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you again, Natasha, for being on. Before we finish this episode, I wanted to also make sure we highlighted the review of the week. I so appreciate your reviews. This one is from Paulie Bill, and they said, so helpful. I can't describe in words how much this podcast has helped me. Kimberley is so open and accepting, even via headphones. I love that. She has set me on the path to recovery in my anxieties. I look forward to do the work. So thank you so much. I do love your reviews. We are on a mission to get 1,000 reviews. If you would go over and leave a review on iTunes, that would be so wonderful. The biggest gift you could give me. It allows us to reach more people. It allows us, when people open up the app and they see that it's highly reviewed, it means they're more likely to click on and listen. And that means I get to help more people for free with this free resource. So thank you so much for Paulie Bill for leaving a review. I love you all. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you here next week. Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.